Hello, my name is Samuel Silbury. I'm a solutions architect here at Nirmata. And today I'm going to show you how you can do simple network debugging strictly from Nirmata without having to have access to the cluster via kubectl or be able to log on to nodes in the cluster. So, in this example, we're going to take as an example a Tomcat application. And we're told by other developers that they're unable to access the Tomcat application internally. Interestingly, other people are saying they can access the Tomcat application externally. So let's take a closer look. So we have our Tomcat application, and let's go find the launched application. And you can see we have one resource here. It's deployment. It's running a single pod. It's running. It's been up for about 3 hours. It's got an IP address. It seems to be ready. It's not restarting. Everything looks okay with it. If we go over to discovering routing and we look, we can see we have a Tomcat service. It's a load balancer. It's been assigned to cluster IP. Everything's being mapped to port 80, so that seems like it should work. And we can see the load balancer has assigned an IP address, and we can even go to that IP address, and we see Tomcat here. So what's going on? At this point, we don't know. So we're going to go back to Tomcat, and we can look at the logs here of the pod. And so we can see them, we look at them, maybe we can find something here, maybe we don't. So we can click on the pod itself, and now we can see the actual container in the pod. So here we have an additional option, we can launch a terminal. So sometimes when you're debugging, it's useful to be able to get into the pod. Now, it's less useful here because curl's not installed, there's no ping, there's no wget, and also we know Tomcat's up and running because we can access it externally. So probably if we had curl, we could probably access it here. I mean, we can't even do name lookup. We don't have ns lookup or dig or anything. So what do we do at this point? Now if you were an administrator, you could log on to the nodes and poke around. You could use kubectl, but if you're a developer, you might be locked out of those things. You might only have access to specific catalogs and specific environments. So how do we deal with that? So what you want to do is bring up a debugging pod. So the best way to do that is to create an application, and we're just going to call this application netshoot. And we won't throw any YAML in here. So we're going to add a deployment. We'll call the deployment netshoot. And then we are going to use one of my favorite debugging containers, netshoot. We don't need to give it any ports or anything like that. And now we have this. So by default, if we brought this up, this pod would just crash because it has no ability to, it's just going to bring up a bash shell, and the bash shell is going to go, you didn't tell me to do anything, and it's just going to crash. So if we go into the deployment and we edit the container, we can give the container a command. So we'll give the command sleep. And as an argument, we'll give it a very long number. You can give it infinity, but that only works if you're using real, actual, honest-to-God GNU sleep. Something like BusyBox isn't going to sleep infinitely if you give it infinity. So, as an argument. Now we're going to run our application, and we'll find our default, we'll find our environment and not use the default environment. We're going to use Tomcat. We'll call this guy netshoot, and environments are pretty much the same as namespaces. So we have to wait here while it brings up the netshoot pod, and this will take a little bit of time. And pulling the image. And now it's running. So if we click on the pod again and we go over here to the container and we bring up a shell. So now we have ping, we have NSLOOKUP, we have everything we need to debug things. So we're going to try to curl our tomcat pod. So we'll curl the service here. We just time out. All right, so let's go take a look. Maybe we can curl the pod directly. So if we look here, we've got the IP address. Now note that if we look in here, we can see the service exposes port 80, but we are mapping, there we are. We are mapping port 8080. So be very careful when you're talking directly to a pod. It could be completely different than a completely different port than what you're used to accessing it from the service. Oops. Always helps if we actually try to curl. That doesn't work. Can we ping Tomcat? Now, pinging a service, depending on your CNI, won't work. In most CNIs I use, it won't work at all. We ping that. So be very cautious of believing ping, not responding to pings means anything. All right, so if we come back here to Tomcat and we poke around for a bit, eventually what we're going to find is a network policy rule. So we can see here we've got the default deny ingress. This seems pretty choice here. If we turn both the ingress and egress rules to allow all, and note that when you're using a network policies are basically like a firewall inside your cluster. If something's exposed through a service like a node port or a load balancer or something like that, then your network policies are not going to protect you. Also remember that not all CNIs are going to support network policy rules. So if we come back here and we try pinging the pod again, now we're getting it. If we ping the service, it's still not working. Canal's just never going to let me ping a service. If we curl Tomcat, we get it. We curl the pod, it works. So this was just a simple misconfigured network policy. You'll find all sorts of things where maybe you're just referencing the wrong port, but this is how you're going to be able to bring up something to debug your networking issues. So you can use the NetShoot container. You can use like a full-fledged Ubuntu container. There's also BusyBox, although BusyBox is a little minimal on the networking tools side. You can use the Bash container, which again is a little bit minimal in the networking tools side. But they're all manner of valid containers you can use here. And yeah, that's basically how you troubleshoot a networking issue without ever having to log onto the servers or having to have kubectl or even understand kubectl. So thank you very much. I'll see you again with our next video next week.